In the bustling heart of Detroit, Michigan, Crestline Industries stood as a beacon of innovation in the automotive manufacturing sector. Known for its commitment to quality and community, the company thrived under the watchful eye of its CEO, Robert Carter. However, as years passed, Robert began to feel increasingly disconnected from the workforce that formed the backbone of his company. From the confines of his polished office, he realized he had lost sight of the very people who made Crestline successful. The urge to reconnect grew stronger, especially after a particularly revealing quarterly review meeting. Among the reports, one employee's name kept surfacing: Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was not the typical star employee. She was quiet, reserved, and often went unnoticed in the flurry of more vocal personalities. Yet, her work ethic was unparalleled. She consistently volunteered for overtime, took on shifts no one else wanted, and managed to keep the assembly line running smoothly, all while maintaining a demeanor that suggested she preferred to remain in the background. Curiosity piqued, Robert pondered what drove Sarah's relentless work ethic. Why did she take on the extra shifts? What was her story? The board had been pressuring him to foster a more connected and empathetic workplace, and Sarah's dedication presented an ideal opportunity for him to understand the challenges faced by his employees. Instead of scheduling a formal meeting, Robert devised a plan to go undercover. He would don the identity of a new hire, David Lawson, and immerse himself in the daily grind of the factory floor. For 2 weeks, he prepared, excited and apprehensive about stepping into the lives of his employees. When the day finally arrived, Robert, dressed casually in a simple polo shirt and jeans, entered the production floor. The sounds of machinery and the rhythmic clanging of tools were overwhelming yet invigorating. As David, he was assigned to the assembly line, where he would work alongside Sarah. From the very first day, he noticed her quiet determination. While other employees chatted during breaks, Sarah sat alone, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. She never complained, even during the long hours, and her efficiency was remarkable. Robert found himself drawn to her resilience but puzzled by her isolation. One afternoon, during a brief break, he decided to strike up a conversation. "You really focus on your work," David said, trying to sound casual. Sarah glanced up, offering a polite smile. "I just prefer to keep my head down," she replied softly, her eyes darting away. "Fair enough," he responded, trying to gauge her further. "But why take every extra shift? Doesn't it get exhausting?" She hesitated, her expression unreadable. "Some people work for paychecks, I work for something more," she replied, leaving David intrigued but cautious not to push. As days turned into weeks, Robert began piecing together fragments of Sarah's life. She rarely engaged with her co-workers, and the more he observed, the more convinced he became that there was a story waiting to be uncovered. One rainy evening, he noticed Sarah volunteering for yet another overtime shift. Deciding to join her, he followed her out of the factory, careful to keep his distance. Sarah walked briskly through the dimly lit streets, her expression tense, frequently checking her phone. When she stopped at a pharmacy, Robert's curiosity deepened. What was she rushing for? After she exited with a small bag, he trailed her to a rundown house on the outskirts of town. Peering through a window, he was struck by what he saw: Sarah caring for an elderly woman in a wheelchair, tending to her needs with a compassion that radiated warmth. In that moment, the pieces fell into place. Sarah wasn't just a dedicated employee, she was a caregiver, balancing the demands of work and family. The sight of her nurturing the elderly woman filled Robert with admiration and guilt. He hadn't set out to uncover a tragedy but rather to understand the strength of someone who carried such heavy burdens with grace. Determined to help Sarah without diminishing her pride, Robert went back to the office with a new sense of purpose. The next morning, he approached the HR department with a proposal to enhance employee support programs, specifically aimed at those juggling caregiving responsibilities. He suggested flexible scheduling options and additional health benefits to alleviate the burdens faced by employees like Sarah. The HR team embraced the idea enthusiastically, aligning it with the company's mission. Over the next few weeks, Robert worked tirelessly to implement these changes while continuing to engage with Sarah on the production floor. He watched as her demeanor slowly shifted. The weight she carried seemed to lighten as she began to accept the idea of support. The day of the company-wide meeting arrived with a sense of anticipation. Employees gathered, buzzing with excitement, unaware that the changes they had been hearing about were inspired by Sarah's quiet strength. Robert took the stage, no longer in disguise. He spoke of the importance of empathy and connection, revealing how Sarah's story had ignited a transformative journey for the entire company. As he called Sarah to the front, the room erupted in applause. But for Sarah, it was a moment filled with confusion and betrayal. She felt exposed, like her life had been put on display without her consent. After the meeting, she slipped away, seeking refuge in a quiet corner of the break room. "Sarah," Robert said softly, finding her there. "Can we talk?" She crossed her arms defensively, her heart racing. "What could you possibly say to make this better?" "I'm sorry," he began. "I never meant to use your story for a lesson. I wanted to understand your challenges, and what I learned changed me profoundly." "You exploited my life for your agenda," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "I felt like a pawn in your game. Please, understand. I wanted to create real change, and your resilience inspired that," he explained earnestly. "I want to ensure you and others like you feel supported." The tension hung in the air as Sarah grappled with conflicting emotions. Slowly, the edges of her anger began to soften. "I just need time," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," Robert replied, genuinely understanding the gravity of the situation. Days turned into weeks as Sarah navigated her emotions. She witnessed the changes in the workplace and began to see the benefits of the new support programs. With her mother receiving professional caregiving assistance, she felt a bit of relief. As Sarah adapted to the changes, Robert remained committed to forging a new path for Crestline, ensuring the initiatives were not just temporary gestures but lasting commitments. He reached out to local organizations, expanding resources and partnerships to further support employees. One afternoon, Sarah found herself chatting with a coworker who remarked on the positive changes in the company. "You've really made a difference," they said. Sarah smiled, a quiet pride swelling in her heart. "We all have," she replied, realizing that change was a collective effort. Meanwhile, Robert continued to engage with employees, seeking their input and fostering a culture of transparency and empathy. As he worked closely with Sarah, he recognized her evolution from a quiet worker to a confident advocate for change. Months later, Sarah stood in front of a group of employees, sharing her story and the importance of the new caregiving support program. Her voice, once soft and reserved, now resonated with strength and conviction. "None of us should have to carry our burdens alone," she declared, her eyes scanning the room filled with attentive faces. "Together, we can create a workplace that values every individual, both personally and professionally." As the audience erupted in applause, Robert watched from the back, filled with pride. He had set out to discover the heart of his company, and in the process, he had found a new understanding of leadership. Crestline Industries was no longer just a manufacturing firm, it was a community that thrived on empathy, support, and connection. In that moment, both Sarah and Robert realized that true leadership is not about power but about lifting others up, paving the way for collective success. Their journey, marked by challenges and triumphs, had forged a bond that would shape the future of Crestline for years to come.